Okay, hi everybody. I happened to see the following cartoon in the New Yorker today. Here's the weak point. So someone at the New Yorker is following Daf Yomi, right? But this, I think, perfectly fits the theme of these dafim, that you're supposed to have a wall. And, if once you have a wall, it can go around a very large area. But the problem is when you have a breach in the wall, and depending on how big that breach is and other factors, that's why we need all these different cross beams and side posts. So, okay, with that in mind, we are studying Eruvin, Yud Bet 12, and we have four major topics. Most of it is going to be talking about the requirement for two side posts. Right, a Eliezer, the Mishnah requires two side posts from Avoy. We're going to ask, is that enough? Or also crossbeam or anything else. Once we're on that topic, we're going to discuss two other Amoraim, Rabbi Yohanan and Shemuel. How about them? Do they require two side posts for a chaser? The question is for a chaser, not from Avoy. We're going to talk about the difference also between the requirements of the two. And then we are going to get to a flooded courtyard, which is quite an interesting case, as we'll see. Then back to the question that recurs many times: is the crossbeam considered a legal wall or a sign? Right? What is it? And finally, we're going to learn that a mavoi cannot be square, and we're going to talk about circles and other shapes. So a lot of interesting and important topics. All right, just to review the Mishnah that we're going to discuss. We saw the Mishnah yesterday that according, if you have a mavoi, you have this courtyard with three sides. Bet Shammai says you need either a cross beam or a side post. You need both. Sorry, Bet Shammai says you need both. Bet Hillel says you need one or the other. The Eliezer says lehayayin. That's the dual form. You need two side posts. So our question is that it? Just two side posts, or is he going to say side posts and assume that you need also a beam, a cross beam, since that was mentioned before? I mean, it doesn't look like you needed the cross beam, but that's going to be the first topic of discussion. And then we saw this little this story about the student that said before the Akiva that they only argued when it's that they did not argue if it's less than 4 amot, right? The width of the mavoi, about 6 feet wide. And Akiva says no, they argue in that case also. All right, so now we begin. Rabbi Eliezer is one that said need two side posts. The question is, Rabbi Eliezer lechayayin vekorak amar or dema lechayayin belo korak amar? Of course, he needs two side posts. Does he also require a cross beam, or no? He doesn't require a cross beam. So we're going to try to derive it from a story. Tashema Maaseh Rabbi Eliezer shehalach esel Rabbi Yosef ben Perida talmido leoblin masal sheyoshev b'mavoi she'en lo ela lechi echad. So Rabbi Eliezer went to Rabbi Yosef, the son of, this looks like Frida, which was, I think, an ancient name, but I don't know if it's maybe it's his father. I don't know. Talmido. So Rabbi Eliezer goes to his student's house, which was in the city of Oblin. And he saw that he's sitting in the mavoi, and the mavoi has only one side post. Amalo beni, says, oh, you better go do this and make a second side post. That makes sense. This is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Amalo, but the student objected and said, what do you mean? I have to close up the whole side? Now, this is an interesting objection, because if he just had to put another side post, why is he calling that closing the whole side? Should we infer from here that it was also a cross beam, and now you had a cross beam and a side post, now he's saying put another side post? Well, now you have already two side posts and a cross beam. That makes a surat petach, that makes a framework. So you see, when he says that when the student objects, I have to close the whole thing, it sounds like there are three different items. Okay, the Gemara is going to say that in a second. But first, we're quoting the rest of the Baraita. Amalo yisatem uma bekach. Rabbi Eliezer said, yeah, close it up. What's the big deal? So you get another piece of wood. So Rabbi Eliezer made the student do that. Now we're going to quote the rest of the Tosefta, which is not immediately relevant now, but we're going to discuss it further in a minute. אמר רבן שמעון בן גמליאל, לא נחלקו בית שמאי ובית הלל על מבוי שהיא פחות מ4 אמות, שאין צריך כלום. בית הלל ובית שמאי did not argue if it's less than 4 amot. They agreed that you don't need anything, not a lechi, and not a korah, nothing. This is not the same as a Mishnah. Our Mishnah, that student of Rabbi Akiva said, they both agree that you need one thing. Okay, that's what we're going to ask about this. The machloket is between 4 and 10 amot, the width of the mavoy, and Bet Shammai says need both, and Bet Hillel says need one or the other. Okay, Ketani Mihat, but back to our story and the question that we want to ask from the story. The student said, what do I have to close the whole thing? If you think that a Eliezer requires 2 side posts and a crossbeam, although the crossbeam wasn't stated, right, then it makes sense, the student's objection. Do I have to close the whole thing? I'm making the whole frame. But if he just requires 1 more side post, two side posts, what's the big deal? Why is he calling that closed? We answer, yeah, the language still fits, even if he only requires 2 side posts. He meant, you have to close it up with so many side posts from both sides, it kind of looks closed in. And that's what he meant. And you can't infer from his language that there was also a crossbeam there. Okay, so we forget that. And so we're going to leave Rabbi Eliezer according to the Pashat. All he said is need 2 side posts, and so we're going to leave it like that. For Mavoy, he requires 2 side posts. All right, but now that we quoted that story and we had attached to the...
Rabbi, quick question on that.
Yeah.
So are we, based on like our original thought, are we assuming that this Rabbi Yosef was holding like Bet Shammai, that he would also have a Korah, that he would have both?
Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer is certainly more machmir than the Bet Hillel, he needs 2 things.
No, but we're saying that, are we assuming that there already was a crossbeam, or that he's requiring also a crossbeam?
He's requiring also a cross, right? That in the Mishnah is requiring also a crossbeam. That's the way that's the way we were originally reading it.
Because it sounded like the assumption was that the crossbeam was there and 1 lehi was there.
Well, in this story, yes, in the story, that's how we're reading the story. That there was already 1 and 1. Oh, I mean that student was the student following Bet Shammai?
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, right. Maybe he just happened to have both. I don't know. Right? That's a good question. I don't know why he had both in that case. But yeah, anyway, we reject it anyway. So the story is simple. Okay, so now Amar Mor. Now we quoted that at the second half of the Tosefta was the opinion of Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Lo nechluku bet Shammai bet Hillel amar boy shepachot m4 amot sheno sarich kelum. So Rashbag thinks that if the space this way, the width of the mavoy is less than 4 amot, less than 6 feet, you don't have to put anything in order to, you don't have to fix it at all. But our Mishnah, the Mishnah that we are on in Masechet Eruvin, says Mishum Rabbi Yishmael Amar Tamid Echad Ifnei Rabbi Akiva Lo Nechilku Bet Shammai Bet Hillel Mavoy Shu Pachot M4 Amot Shehu Nitar O Belechi O Bekorah. That student, who Rabbi Akiva himself actually didn't agree, but fine. Even according to that student, you need, even if it's less than 4, you need either a crossbeam or a side post. You need one or the other. And Rashbag said you need neither when it's less than 4. So how could he say that? Which is it? Amar Rav Ashi Kamar, Eno sarich lechi vekorah kebet Shammai, velo lechayayin kerebi Eliezer, ela o lechi o korah kebet Hillel. Okay, we're going to modify Rashbag's words a little bit to make it fit into the Mishnah. He says what he meant to say is, I don't need a lechi and a korah like Bet Shammai, and I don't need 2 lechayim like Rabbi Eliezer. Rather, I need this or this, either this or that, Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel, and nothing more. So when he says no serich kelum, he means nothing more than than just one thing. Add in nothing more than just one thing. All right, as doesn't fit the words precisely, but we are going to fit it in because we want to reconcile them. All right, vechama. So now we ask, all right, fine, you still told me that less than 4 amot, I still need something, but is there any minimum amount that a mavoy, if it's less than that, I don't need anything at all? What would be that minimum? Amar Rav Achle, V'tem Rav Yehiel, Ad arba'a. Arba'a, right, is achad, the first two, tefachim. So 4 tefachim, or 4 handbreadths, about 1 foot. If the entire mavoi is only 1 foot in its width, then you don't need anything. I mean, you can barely even fit through. I don't know what use that kind of alleyway would be, but the point is you can carry there without changing anything. Okay, remember this statement of Rav Achle, because it's going to come up again later in today's daf. Okay, good. So now one more point about this. Amar Rav Sheshat, Amar Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba, Amar Rav, Modim Chachamim Rabbi Eliezer bepaseh haser. Now, obviously, when regarding a mavoi, halacha is going to be like Bet Hillel. You need one or the other. But Rav is now saying that Chachamim agreed to Rabbi Eliezer if regarding a haser, right? So remember that the courtyard, mavoi, is the courtyard that joins multiple. Mavoi is the alleyway that joins multiple courtyards. So, and that's a little bit more lenient. But a courtyard that has multiple houses in it has a slightly stronger requirements. And so Rav is saying, even though we don't follow Rabbi Eliezer regarding a mavoi, you just need one or the other. But if you have a haser, and the haser has 3 full walls, but the last wall is open, and it's a problem, and you need 2 side posts for the haser in order to carry within the haser, 2 side posts. Nachman said a similar thing, because we follow Rabbi Eliezer. He doesn't say we follow, he doesn't say that Chachamim agreed to Rabbi Eliezer, he just says we follow Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, but the point is the same, that is the halacha, so that's going to be important. A chaser, you need 2 side posts. A mavoi, you only need 1 side post. Okay, now that we mentioned these chachamim, we're going to ask, who are these chachamim that you said that they agree with Rabbi Eliezer? Amar Nachman bar Yitzchak, man modim Rabbi. Who are these people that say is agree? Oh, these are the people that have a dispute with Rabbi. Halacha mechilad piligif. You say halacha is like them, like them, then like him, like Rabbi, and there's someone that disagrees. Man paligaled Rabbanan detanya. Aser niteret pas echad. Rabbi Omer Bishne Pasin. Okay, here good. We have a direct baraita that tells us the whole story. That you have a chaser, courtyard. All you need is 1 side post. That's the opinion of Chachamim. Rabbi says you need 2. So although Rabbi, that's the Biur Nasi, is a minority opinion here, that's the point of Rav, is that we follow Rabbi and we apply what Rabbi Eliezer says regarding mavoi. We apply that to the chaser. So that's a good principle to remember. Chaser has walls on 3 sides, is going to need 2 side beams on the open side. Okay, good. So now we completed item A, right? But now we're going to discuss Rabbi Yochanan now for a chaser. Okay, it's a mavoi. We reject everybody else. Bet Hillel says just 1. You just need 1 thing. But chaser is still the question. Right, we said halacha is that you need 2, but does everybody agree with that? Let's see. Let's test out Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rabbi Aseh, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Chaser shesricha shetnei pasin. There you go. Courtyard needs 2 side posts. If it's open on 1 side, it needs 2 side posts on that open side. Okay, so he seems to agree that that's the halacha. Amar le Rabbi Zera le Rabbi Aseh. Mi Amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi veha atu de'amart mishmed Rabbi Yochanan. Haser serichin sheyebahen arba'a. Rabbi Zera asks his colleague, Rabbi Aseh, did Rabbi Yochanan really teach us that? But you're the one that told me a different tradition in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that the side posts of a courtyard have to be at least 4 tefachim. Okay, that's 4 tefachim, about 1 foot. So now if you're saying it's 4 feet, 4 tefachim, so how are you going to put these 4 tefachim, right? So now you just said it has to be on both sides, right? So what does that mean? You said 4 tefachim. Is that 4 tefachim on each side, 4 tefachim and 4 tefachim, right? If you say that, that's going to go against a baraita we're not going to get into the whole thing, but if you probably remember, we had discussed at length this baraita that says you have two courtyards adjacent, a big one and a small one. So the big the big one you can carry in because you have these two here side, pasim, two side posts. But the small one you can't carry because it has no side posts. And the baraita said that this scenario is where this is 10 amot wide and this one is 11 amot wide, right? And we still apply that halacha that you are allowed to carry in the big one. So now if this is 11 amot wide and this is 10, that means this is only one bigger than this. One amah is 6 tefachim, so that leaves like 3 tefachim on one side and 3 tefachim on the other side, which is less than 4 and 4. So you see that Rabbi Yochanan could not possibly mean that you need both sides, 4 on one side and 4 on the other side, because that would contradict this baraita, whose dimensions would be 3 and 3 on each side. So it can't be that. Rather, it must mean that when he says 4 tefachim, it's on one side. Okay, and therefore you see only need it on one side. So we have a contradiction. Rabbi Yochanan said you need 2 side posts on both sides of a chased, and then from this thing they said we need 4 tefachim. We infer that's only on one side. So now we have a problem. But luckily, Rabbi Zera asked the question, and he thought about it for a while. He said, Rabbi Zera miyameh. After he came back from a trip in the sea, then he figured out an answer. This is what he meant. If you have want to put it on only one side, that's okay. You can put it on one side, and then you need 4 tefachim at least. Or you can put it on both sides. If you have it on both sides, then you just need a tiny bit of wall jutting out here, and a tiny bit of wall jutting out here. This is a better picture, right? Here's a chased, and so this could be small amount. If it's on if you both of his statements, both are true. Rabbi Yochanan said you need it on both sides. Yes, that's true. That's if it's a little bit and a little bit. And he also said you need 4 tefachim. And that's also true. That's if you want it all on one side. Okay. Now what about that baraita that had it on 2 sides and 3 tefachim and 3 tefachim? V'adetane ada bar abimi rebihi. That baraita that was all about this whole scenario, and it had on both sides and 3 tefachim on each side. That follows the Rabbi who requires both sides, and it also follows the Rabbi Yosef. We saw this opinion already, who requires them to be at least 3 handbreadths on each side. So that's baraita doesn't follow the opinion of everyone, and doesn't have to agree with Rabbi Yochanan. And so now we resolved item B in our list, right? That Rabbi Yochanan, does he require 2 side posts for a chased? Yes, if you want to make them very thin, but if you want to put one side, that's okay, as long as it's 4 tefachim wide. Okay, now we're going to get to Shemuel, and we're going to have a very similar structure. We're going to say you need 2 sides. We're going to ask a question, and we're actually going to resolve Shemuel the same way we did Rabbi Yochanan. So let's see how this plays out. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shemuel. Haser niteret bepas ehad. So Shemuel said it's enough to have it only on one side. Okay, actually, it's the opposite then. Okay, at first Shemuel says all you need is for a breached courtyard is one side. Amar le Abaye Rav Yosef. Umi Amar Shemuel hachi. Amar le Shemuel le Rab Hananya bar Shela. At la ta'abed obada ela o berov dofen o bishne pasim. We have an actual case where Shemuel told someone, says, do not make an enclosure, Eruvin, a courtyard, unless you have a majority of the wall or side posts on both sides. So, right? So according to this, you do need side posts on both sides if you don't have a majority wall. And so this contradicts the first statement that Shemuel says you only need a side post on one side. Okay. Amar le Rav Yosef answers and says, "Va'ana layadana dobadava bedura deravata." He says, "Ana layadana." I don't know how to answer your question, but I have my own tradition, my own story that happened in this shepherd's village. And here's the story. It was a flooded courtyard. לשון ים הנכנס לחסר הבא, ואתה לקמד רב יהודה ולא אסרכה אלא פס אחד. Here's a picture of that. So he had a courtyard and it got flooded. And so now, right, we know a sea is considered a karamelit, which means reshut harabim de midrabanan. And so now this whole side obviously is basically open. And he said to enclose it, you need to put a pass on one side. Okay, so there you go. Here's a real story that Shemuel came and said, all you need is a side post on one side, not on both sides. So Rav Yosef said, I'm right. You have a story. Well, I have a story too, where you only required one side. Okay. How's he going to answer? Abaye, who brought the first story, says, "Lashon yam ka'amart, palu she'ekelu chachamim b'mayim." You bring your proof from a case in water. There's a wall inserted in water or on top of water. That's a special leniency. You can't apply that same thing on land. How do I know? אין מחיסה תלויה מטרת אלא במים. קל הוא שהקלו חכמים במים. So the question is, let's say I have a hanging wall in Eruvin, right? A house that's like dilapidated and have a wall that only the top half is there, but not the bottom. Is that okay or not? And he said, no, it's not good because a hanging wall is only good on top of water. So, for example, this is a case we saw back in Masechet Shabbat. Let's say I live in Venice, right? And I outside my window I have a river, have some water, and I want to draw it up on Shabbat. So this is a problem because this is a Reshut Yachid inside, and the water is Karmelit, which is Midrabanan Reshut Harabim. So I can't do that. So what you do is you create a box on four sides. And so this box creates a Reshut HaYachid, and then I can put my bucket down there, and I'm drawing it up within Reshut HaYachid. And we imagine as if the walls of this box go all the way down. So this is a hanging wall, and that is permitted. This also is useful on the side of a ship, if you want to draw up water or throw things down on the side of a ship. So this is a special leniency that the rabbis made for water, because in water it's really difficult. What are you going to get the walls to extend all the way down to the bottom of the ocean? So that's why it's permitted in the case of this, right, where it's flooded. It says, oh, you only need one side because, right, this is more lenient when you're in water than when you're on land. But on land, Abaye says, Shemuel follows my story that he required both sides or a majority of a wall. Okay. And okay, so anyway, Bikol Makom Kashia. So we still have a difficulty, however, right? Because Rav Yosef said that according to Shemuel, you need one side, and the story says Shnei Fasin. So it's still a contradiction. Two different students of his, but their traditions contradict each other. So we have to say one's wrong and one's right. כי עטו רב פאפא ורב הונא ברד רב יהושע מברב פרשוה מרוח אחת בארבעה משתי רוחות משהו לכאן ומשהו לכאן. So we have an explanation. If you want to make it on one side, then you need 4 tefachim. If you make posts on both sides, then all you need is a sliver here and a sliver there. The same thing that we said for the Rabbi Yochanan, that's how we're going to resolve this one here also, and that explains everything. The first statement where he said 1, it means you need 1, but it has to have 4 tefachim. Or you could do on both sides. Okay, what we're going to ask now is his language in this story was you need the majority of a wall or 2 posts. He says majority of a wall. Majority of the wall isn't necessarily 4 tefachim, right? Okay, Amar Papa, Ikashali, Hakashali, since I still have a difficulty, the Mother Shemuel Rav Chananya, Bar Shela, in that story, Atulat Habit Ubada Ela, or Berov Dofen, or Bishne Fasin. You got to do either the majority of a wall or two side posts. He said majority of the wall. Lama li Rov Dofen, Bepas Arba'a Sagi. It's enough to have just 4 tefachim. So why do you say you need a majority? That seems a lot more than just 4 tefachim, just 1 foot. And I know you're clever. Oh, when that case he was talking about, when he said, make sure it's a majority of a wall, that was a case where the side was only 7 tefachim wide. And that's why majority of 7 is 4. That's why he said majority. In other words, really he says 4. In that case, happened to be, the whole thing was only 7. So majority is the same thing as saying 4. Okay, so maybe you'll say that. That would be a clever answer. But no, it doesn't work. In such a case, I wouldn't even need 4. Even 3 and a bit would be enough. Because remember, I told you to remember this before, but Rav Achle said, anything that's less than 4 tefachim is like nothing. It's like not even a space, right? And so therefore, if I have a space that's total 7, and I make a wall that's 3.1, yeah, then what is left? 3.9. 3.9 is less than 4, and less than 4 is considered nothing, right? That's what Rav Achle said. If you have a breach less than 4, I don't need to fix it at all. It's not even considered a breach. And so, if that was really the case, that I was talking about a total of 7, then all he would need was 3 and a bit. He wouldn't have to say 4. And therefore, that answer doesn't work. And so we are left with the question, the contradiction of Shemuel. There's 2 statements, and we're going to offer two more answers. Okay, one answer is that when Rav Achle said that less than 4 tefachim, you don't consider it anything, that was only regarding a mavoy. A very thin mavoy, you don't have to fix it at all. But chased, you do. Chased is more stringent in general, and maybe a breach in a chased wall, that's even if it's less than 4, you might have to add something to it. Or we can reject Rav Achle totally and say that's one opinion, but it's subject to a machloket of different sages, and so perhaps Shemuel's following the sage that says yes, even less than 4, you do have to close it up, and therefore, the case he was talking about was one where it was 7 tefachim wide, and really you need, in the general, you need 4 tefachim. In that case, happened to be 4 tefachim was also a majority of these area. Okay, very good. So now we finished section number 1, which is all the laws about having 2 side posts. And now we're going to talk about a short case about a flooded courtyard. Tenor Rabbanan Lashon Yam Hanichnas Lechaser En Memalein Hemenu B'Shabbat Ela Im Ken Yesh Lo Mechisa Gabo Ha'asara Tefachim. Okay, so I have literally the tongue of a sea. It means a extension of a sea flooded and came into a courtyard. So the law is really, this only comes in a little bit. You need a better picture. Would be this one. Okay, so it floods the whole area, and the law is that if I'm living here, I am not allowed to take my bucket and go over here and now draw water and take it in, right? Because this is karmelit, reshut harabim d'Rabbanan, and I can't go and bring it inside and take it inside. That would be carrying. Unless yesh mechitza gavoa 10 tefachim. Unless I have a wall that's high. Or in other words, it got flooded. If the wall is still high enough that's 10 tefachim above the water, then that would be okay. Then it's a wall, and then the water is in my space, right? And so then that'll be okay. And it's only restricted when the break between the walls is more than 10 amot wide, but if it's 10 or less, and I don't need anything, right? Because that would be considered a frame, a small, it's a small breach. We don't have to worry about that. Okay, that's what the Baraita said. Now we're going to ask.
Rabbi, is that a mistake in the language? Usually, when we have Zachar numbers, it's referring to Tifahim, and the Nekeva numbers are referring to Amot. How come we have Asara Zachar for an Amma?
Right. Asara should be Tifahim. Should be Amot. So Asara is Zachar and should refer to Tefachim, unless it's 10 Tefachim. But 10 Tefachim wide.
10 Tefachim doesn't make sense here.
It doesn't make sense there. Okay, I do have the manuscript chart actually right here, but I'm afraid to spend too much time looking for it. All right, I'll take a second. Here is the case. Aval beyoter me asara. Here, here you go, okay? And the Vatican manuscript says Esed, Vatican other one says Esed, and this one says Esed. So, yep, the manuscripts do in fact have Esed. So that's a good, you got it right. Excellent.
Very in tune to what's going on, David. Okay, let's continue. Sorry.
Okay, you guys with me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, right, good catch. Really amazing. Okay, so that's the story. Now we have a question. Memalehu de la memaleinan ha paltole metaltedinan. Now this Baraita only said that I can't draw water and bring it from the water area to the dry land. But how about tiltul? How about just carrying my, my frisbee within the dry part? Am I allowed to do tiltul? Sounds like I am allowed, right? Because the only thing I'm not allowed to do is draw water and transfer from this to this. But within this, I am allowed to carry. Well, why? Why should that be allowed to carry? After all, I have a breach, a big breach, more than 10 amot, and there's no wall, and it's open to an area that's a karmelit. Remember, we said even opening to a karmelit is even worse than opening to a reshut harabim, right? That's we said a couple of dapim ago. So there you go. This is why should I be allowed to carry within this area? So a solution is it's talking about where we have a broken wall. Broken wall, something like this. Some say it means the sides are broken, but I think easier explanations that it means that there is a wall under the water. It's just that it broke, so it doesn't go up on top of the water. So in this case, there is in fact a wall that goes from the ground, and it's 10 tefachim high, so it's considered a wall. And therefore, I could say my area is enclosed to the extent that I'm allowed to carry on the dry land. However, there is also water, and the water is now all over here, and the water is connected to the water outside, and therefore I cannot take a bucket and transfer from one to the other. And so that's how we resolve that question. Okay, good. Now that solves that concludes the second part. And now the third section about a crossbeam. Is a crossbeam considered like a fictional wall, or is it just a sign for me to look at so that I'll know not to carry anymore? All right, that's the main question we're going to get into. But in order to do that, we're going to look at this very interesting statement. So just a clarification first. When we say eruv chaserot, the eruv actually refers to a piece of bread, right? A shared piece of bread that everybody is chipping into. The walls and all that is simply a prerequisite so that we have an area that is considered reshut hayachid, midoraita. And then the rabbi said, once you have that and all the requirements midrabanan, then you can do the rest. Okay, now same thing with shituf mevaot. If I have multiple courtyards and I want to join them together, also need a meal to put in the middle that the residents of the courtyards share that meal. Okay, so it's really the meal that's the main thing, and the walls are the other requirements that I need, midoraita and midrabanan. Okay, with that in mind. Amar Rav Yehuda, mavoi shelo nishtatefu bo. What if I have mavoi and they did not make a common meal? So all I have is the walls and they didn't make it in common. This is very, very interesting conceptually to think about what the Eruv actually does. Hechshiro belechi hazorek letocho hayav. Hechshiro bekora hazorek letocho patur. So let's assume that this is a courtyard with 3 sides. And if I put elechi and on the 4th side, then someone who throws from the outside the Shut Rabim inside is Hayav, which means that the inside is considered the Shut Hayachid Mideoraita. And that's why if I throw in from outside to inside, Hayav. So even though it's the Shut Hayachid Mideoraita, the rabbis came and said, I can't carry inside until I do an Eruv, right? But from the letter of the law, it is a Shut Hayachid. However, if I did not put across a pole, but instead I put only a cross beam, then someone who throws from the outside in is patur. In other words, if I have only 3 walls and a cross beam, the cross beam does not make it into a shutayachid medoraita. It's still a part of Reshut Harabim, and therefore, if I throw in, I'm not transferring from one area to the other. Okay, so this is quite interesting. What was the difference between putting a side post and a crossbeam? We thought it's the same thing. Okay, Matkifla Rav Sheshat. Rav Sheshat is going to argue with this. Tama delo nishtatefu bo. Nishtatefu bo. Afido hishiro bekora name hayab. Is analyzing the statement. It says, okay, the reason is because they didn't make an eruv. They didn't make a partnership. But if they did make a partnership, then the crossbeam would make it into a reshut yachid, and if you threw it in, it would be chayav. Is that true? Or reshut rabim? How's that possible? Does the bread turn it into a reshut yachid or reshut rabim? Does the bread act as a wall? I mean, the definition from the Torah of whether something is reshut yachid is only based on its architecture, only based on the walls. So what is this loaf doing? Tanya. חסרות של רבים ומבואות שאינן מפולשים בין ערבו בין שלא ערבו הזורק לתוכן חייב. If I have a courtyard or a mavoi that is not open, right, it's closed, then it doesn't matter whether I made an eruv or whether I didn't make an eruv. It's considered a reshut hayachid from the Torah, and therefore if I throw from the reshut rabim into it, I'm going to be chayav. And here it says explicitly, it doesn't matter. Even if I don't make an eruv, it makes no difference. So why are you telling me here that it does make a difference if I make an eruv or not regarding a cross beam? Okay, that's all the question. Ela i'itmar ha'chi'itmar. Amar Rav Yehuda, mavoi she'eno ra'ui l'shituf, hechshero belechi, hazorek letocho chayav. Hechshiro bekora, hazorek letocho patur. So this statement, which was said by Rabbi Yehuda, we have to reinterpret it in order to make it fit this baraita. And here's what he meant: a mavoi that is not fit for a partnership. In other words, the architecture is not sufficient. Like if it has only 2 walls, right? That's only 2 walls. It's not ready. It's not ready to make a partnership. I can't do a shituf mevaot with it yet. In that case, if I put a lechi, then if I throw into it hayav. Whereas if I put just a crossbeam and I throw into it, so only 2 walls, and I throw into it, then it's patur. Okay, basically he's taking it up Yehuda's statement, and he's making it when there's only 2 walls, not 3 walls. And so he's discussing what is the minimum amount to make it into a reshut yachid medeoraita. And so alechi, 2 walls and alechi does make it Reshut Rabim Doraita, whereas 2 walls and Korah does not. Now, what's the difference between alechi and Korah? Why does lechi work more effectively than Korah? Al makasavar lechi mishum mechisa, the Korah mishum heker. You must think that lechi works as a symbolic wall, kind of legal fiction, and this side post extends the whole way and is a wall. And therefore, since I consider it a wall, I have 3 sides, and that midoraita, that is enough. Whereas a crossbeam does not. Crossbeam is only a sign that says, hey, stop carrying here. It doesn't act as a legal wall. And so therefore I have only 2 walls, which midoraita is not enough. That's nothing. And therefore it's just throwing from the Reshut Rabim into the same Reshut Rabim and would not be chayav. Rabba agreed with that same principle of the conception of the crossbeam is only a sign, whereas a lechi is a symbolic wall. However, Rabba disagrees and says, no, both are signs. Okay, also the side post also is like a sign. Now we're going to have 2 questions on Rabba. Itibe Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba Rava hazorek lemavoy yesh lo lechi hayav and lo lechi patur. If someone throws something in from the Reshut Rabim into mavoy, if it has the lechi, then it's chayav because let's say 2 walls and a lechi, then that's the Reshut Rabim. Whereas if there's no lechi, patur. So why? Why should adding a lechi make a difference according to you, Rava, if it's only a sign, not a wall? Here's what he meant. It actually has 3 sides. And if the only thing it's missing is a lechi, then if you throw into it hayav, because it already has 3 full sides. Lechi v'davar acher hazorek latocho patur. But if it needs lechi and something else, for example, if it has only 2 sides and it needs a surat petach and a door and a lechi, then it needs a lot of things. That means it has only 2 walls and it needs to have another 3rd wall created. That's why patur if I add only a lechi. So we're able to, Rava is able to answer that question. Second question, objection to Rava. Itibe yater al ken amar Rabbi Yehuda mi sheyesh lo shene batim b'shne sidei reshut harabim oseh lechi mikan v'lechi mikan o korah mikan v'korah mikan v'noseh v'noten ba'emsa. If someone owns 2 homes, one on this side of the street and one on the other side of the street, and he wants to carry from one to the other, then he only put a lechi on one side and the other side. In other words, a street coming from one direction and another on the house and the street coming from the other direction, or he makes a cross beam right between the 2 and coming from each direction, and then he can carry in between. Now this is interesting because I have only 2. The houses can serve as walls. I have only 2 walls and the rest is open, and yet you're telling me that a lechi can act as a 3rd wall, right? Because otherwise, how would I be able to carry? That's all that says was what Rabbi Yehuda said. And that story happens to be the rabbis disagreed and said, Amru lo en ma'avin reshut harabim bekach. They said, no, you're not allowed to do that. Okay, but right now we're focusing on Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, who said it is allowed just with a lechi. How could you do that according to the Rava, that you say a lechi is not a symbolic wall but only a sign? Hatam kasaba Rabbi Yehuda shetem mechaisot deoraita. Oh, Rabbi Yehuda must be of the opinion that even just 2 walls is enough to make something into a reshut hayachid mid deoraita. We saw yesterday this was actually machloket between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. Okay, so since only in that case happens to be the Rabbi Yehuda says only 2 walls is enough, that's why the lechi doesn't need to be a wall, and that's sufficient for it to be a sign. Okay, good. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav Mavoy she'orko. Okay, that concludes the 3rd section, and now the very last section is the shape of a mavoy, and what if it's square? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav Mavoy she'orko kerochbo. If the depth, let's get a picture. Here, I'll just pick anything. Right, so the depth in like this way is equal to the length this way, right? If it's a square, then Then you cannot use just one small side post. Right? This is a leniency that we use for mavoy, that a mavoy needs only one side post and it can be very small. Rather, if it's equal in size, this way and that way, then we treat it like a hatzer. Why? Even though it has courtyards opening up into it, it doesn't look like an alleyway, right? Everybody kind of knows an alleyway has to be long and narrow. That's the point. In many things, it's a hallway, right? For a house, it would be a hallway. If it's square, then anyone walking into it says, oh, this looks like a courtyard. And therefore, we have to treat it like a courtyard, and you need more things. You need two side posts or a wide side post on one side. אמר רבי חייא בר אבא בר אשר אמר רב, מבוי שאורכו כרוחבו אינו ניתן בקורת טפח. Same thing also in the name of Rav, that you have to have, if it's square, you can't use the leniencies of a mavoi. Amar Rabbi Zera, kama mechavenan shemata desabeh. Rabbi Zera says, this is what these sages said of Yudah, Rav Chiya, right, was perfect, genius. Kevan deorko kerachbo havaleh haser. What the explanation I just said, once it's square, then it becomes a haser, and a haser cannot be koshered with just a lechi, and a belechi or korah, but rather needs a pas, needs a board that's 4 handbreadths wide. Amar Bizera, ikasheli, hakasheli. Bizera says, I may have a question here. If I have a question, he's proposing, maybe he has a question. Says, wait a second, why not let the side post, even if it's so small, one lechi be like a side post that has something, even if it's small, and allow it with one side post, even if that's small. That was his question. The Gemara says, this is not a very good question. Ishtamiteh, hada amar Rabbi Aseh, amar Rabbi Yochanan, haseh haser, serichin sheheh bahen arba'ah. Got what we said before, that when you have a haser, courtyard, then it has to have one side, has to be 4 tefachim at least. Okay, good. Amar Nachman, naktinan, ezehu mavoy shenitar belechi v'korah, kol sheorko yater al rochbo. So we have a tradition that explains all of this. What is a mavoy that we have that we can apply the leniencies of having only one cross beam or side post, as long as its depth is longer than its width, and it has to have at least 2 courtyards with 2 houses each open to it. And what can't you use? What cannot be considered mavoy? Something that's square. Merubat. So now we ask a question on this. Merubat in agulala. So wait, only if it's square, then you're going to be mahmir. What if it's round? Perfectly round also has the same width and depth. And so is that going to be like a mavoy? All right. That should also be like a haser, because it doesn't look like a hallway. V'chika amar iorka yater al rochba havele mavoy mavoy velechi v'korah sagya ve'ila havele haser. So no, this is what we meant to say, right? When we the statement, a little clarification. If the depth is more than the width, then it's a mavoy, and a mavoy can be redeemed with can be kosher with a lechi or korah. If not, then it's chaser. It's not. So in other words, all other scenarios, not only square, round, any other shape other than a rectangle that goes in more than it's sideways, that is a mavoy. Anything else is a chaser. The kama. Now, how much more does the depth? Show you here. How much more does the depth have to be than the width? 2 opinions. One opinion is it has to be double in its depth than its width. Amar Habibi, afilu mashehu. This is Habibi, my uncle, who he called Habibi because he was beloved to him. That was to be Rav Chia. He said, no, it doesn't have to be double. Even if it's just a little more, then it's considered an alleyway and can be permitted. So I think what we see here is that the definition of an alleyway is not only its usage, that the fact that it has multiple courtyards, but also its shape has to look like something that isn't used in and of itself, right? Like a courtyard where you make picnics out there and you play out there. But rather that, then you need more requirements. But a mavoi, an alleyway, has to be long and thin so that it can actually look like an alleyway. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.